They didn't call it a family portrait at first. The teacher, Mrs. Vance, called it a behavioral map. But when I looked down at the crinkled sheet of white construction paper on that tiny, primary-colored desk, all I saw was a crime scene. A crime scene committed in waxy, blunt-tipped crayons. Most kids in the first grade draw their families like a cluster of grapes, all bunched together, holding hands, grinning with big, jagged red mouths. But my 6-year-old daughter, Maya, had drawn a fortress. It was a 2-story house with a bright blue roof, a bay window on the right where my mother's prized orchids always sat, and a welcome mat that looked exactly like the one I'd tripped over 1,000 times during my own childhood. Inside that house, safe behind the crayon-drawn walls, were 5 people. My parents, my younger brother Silas, his wife Claire, and their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. They were all smiling. They were all dry. And then there was the figure outside. In the bottom right corner of the page, miles away from the front door, stood a small girl with messy brown hair. Maya had drawn herself standing in the grass, surrounded by thick, vertical streaks of dark blue crayon. Rain. There was no umbrella. There was no coat. There was just a little girl watching a house full of people she loved through a window she wasn't allowed to pass through. Mrs. Vance sat across from me, her knees nearly touching her chin in one of those plastic chairs that makes every adult feel like they've shrunk. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just let the silence sit between us, heavy and smelling of tempera paint and pencil shavings. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, the kind teachers use when they're delivering news that's going to break a parent's heart. "Thea," she said, "when a child draws herself outside the family unit, it's a red flag for emotional exclusion." I asked Maya why she was in the rain. Do you know what she told me? I couldn't breathe. The air in the classroom felt like it was made of lead. What did she say? She said, "That's where I stay on Sundays. I wait in the grass until it's time to go home." I stared at that drawing until the blue streaks of rain started to look like bars on a cell. I knew exactly what Maya was talking about. I knew the Sunday family posts my mother made on Facebook, the ones with the heart emojis and the photos of Silas's daughter, Sophie, sitting in my mother's lap, baking cookies in a kitchen I haven't been invited into for 3 years. I knew the architecture of silence my parents had built, brick by brick, uninvited Sunday by uninvited Sunday. I picked up the drawing, my fingers trembling. I wasn't just looking at a piece of schoolwork. I was looking at the blueprint of my daughter's trauma. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized that my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was drowning my child. To understand why my daughter is standing in the rain, you have to understand the Prescott design. My mother, Diane, doesn't just run a household, she curates a reality. Growing up, everything was about the perfect frame. The right clothes, the right grades, the right social circles. My brother Silas was the masterpiece, the golden child who followed the brushstrokes exactly as she laid them down. He married the daughter of my mother's best friend. He took the job at the firm my father partnered with. He was the yes that fueled my mother's ego. And then there was me. I was the smudge on the canvas. 10 years ago, my mother arranged a dinner with a man she called the one. He was polished, he was wealthy, and he was boring. I told her it wasn't going to work. 6 months later, I met Marcus. He was an electrician with sawdust in his hair and a laugh that made the walls of our apartment feel like they were hugging me. He didn't fit the design. He was blue-collar, he was blunt, and most importantly, he was mine, not hers. The day I married Marcus was the day I was moved to the periphery. Oh, she came to the wedding. She smiled in the professional photos. But during her toast, she said something that still echoes in my head when the house is too quiet. I always wanted my daughter to find happiness, even if the path she chose was the one I'd never have drawn for her. Translation: you are the disappointment. You are the difficult one. After that, the exclusion became a slow, quiet rot. It wasn't a sudden banishment, it was a gradual erasure. It started with the family Sunday dinners. At first, there were excuses. "Oh, we thought you were busy with Marcus's family." Then, Silas and Claire just dropped by, it wasn't a big thing. Then, the invitations just stopped. I'd see the photos on Monday morning. My parents, Silas, Claire, and Sophie. 5 people. Always 5. They'd be at the botanical gardens, or the pumpkin patch, or just sitting at the big oak table where I used to do my homework. My mother would tag Silas and Claire. She'd write, "Our whole world in one room." I wasn't in that room. Maya wasn't in that room. I spent years telling Marcus it was fine. I told him they were just busy. I told him we were different, and that was okay. I gaslit myself into believing that as long as we were invited to Christmas and Easter, we were still in the family. But Marcus saw it before I did. He saw the way Sophie had a permanent bedroom at my mother's house, the lavender room, filled with toys and clothes and a hand-painted nameplate on the door. He saw how Maya, on the rare occasions we were allowed over, sat on a folding chair in the corner of the living room, watching Sophie play with Grandma's special dolls that Maya wasn't allowed to touch. "They don't forget us as Thea," Marcus told me 6 months ago after a particularly brutal Easter where my mother forgot Maya's name twice. "They choose to forget us. They are designing a family that doesn't have a place for a daughter who didn't obey." I didn't want to believe him. I wanted to believe in the perfect Prescott facade. But then I saw the drawing. I saw the blue crayon rain. And I realized that while I was busy pretending the door was open, my 6-year-old daughter was catching pneumonia in the silence. The realization that Maya was shrinking didn't happen all at once. It was a series of small, devastating data points. I started looking back through her school folders, the drawings from the last 6 months. In October, she was the same size as the other stick figures. By December, she was a head shorter. By February, she was a tiny, featureless dot at the bottom of the page. She wasn't just drawing herself outside the house. She was drawing herself out of existence. "Mommy," Mia asked me 2 nights after the teacher conference, "why does Sophie have a room at Grandma's house and I have a chair?" I was tucked into her bedside, the smell of strawberry shampoo and bedtime stories filling the air. I froze. "Grandma's house is just smaller for us, honey. We live so close, we don't need a room." Maya didn't look at me. She stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. "Sophie lives closer. Silas' uncle says it's because Sophie is the favorite because she has yellow hair like Grandma. Is that why I stay in the rain?" My heart shattered. I felt the hot, stinging prickle of tears in my eyes, but I forced them back. I realized in that moment that my parents weren't just excluding me. They were teaching my daughter that she was less than. They were building a hierarchy of grandchildren, and Maya was at the very bottom, beneath the welcome mat. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with Maya's drawing and a glass of lukewarm tea. I thought about the 14 photos on my mother's refrigerator. I'd counted them the last time I was there to drop off a birthday gift. 14 photos of Sophie. Sophie at the beach. Sophie at ballet. Sophie on my mother's lap. 0 photos of Maya. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Silas's Instagram. There was a video from last Sunday. They were all in the backyard, my father was grilling, Silas was laughing, and my mother was pushing Sophie on the tire swing I'd grown up on. The caption read, "Nothing beats a Sunday with the whole crew. #family-first #perfect design." The whole crew. 5 people. I felt a cold, sharp resolve harden in my chest. For 10 years, I had been the difficult daughter. I had been the one who made things complicated by asking for a seat at the table. I had been the one who accepted the crumbs of their affection because I was afraid of the hunger that would come if I walked away. But I wasn't going to let Maya be the difficult granddaughter. I wasn't going to let her believe that the rain was her natural habitat. I pulled out my laptop and searched for a name Marcus had mentioned weeks ago. Dr. Nina Caldwell. A family mediator and psychologist who specialized in high-conflict family dynamics and systemic exclusion. I didn't call Silas. I didn't call my mother. I didn't want another round of excuses. I wanted a professional verdict. I wanted someone to look at the Prescott design and tell them exactly what it was doing to the smallest member of the family. I sent an email to Dr. Caldwell at 3 a.m. Subject: Systemic exclusion of a minor. I attached a scan of Maya's drawing. I closed the laptop and looked at the clock. It was Sunday morning. In 4 hours, my mother would be waking up to prep the roast for the whole crew. In 4 hours, Silas and Sophie would be driving over to the blue-roofed house. I walked into Maya's room and watched her sleep. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to wait for an invitation anymore. I was going to crash the perfect Sunday, but I wasn't going to bring a casserole. I was going to bring the truth. And as the sun began to peek through Maya's curtains, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. A photo of my mother's set table. 5 plates. 5 glasses. 5 napkins. I picked up the rain drawing and tucked it into my purse. The design was about to have its first major error. The drive to the blue-roofed house on Sunday afternoon felt like traveling toward the epicenter of a storm. Beside me, Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather. He didn't say much, but the way he glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror told me everything. She was staring out the window, her thumb hooked into the strap of her seatbelt, her small face set in that mask of quiet resignation I'd come to loathe. She wasn't excited. She wasn't nervous. She was braced. At 6 years old, my daughter had the emotional calluses of a war veteran approaching a familiar trench. When we pulled into the driveway, the perfect design was already in full swing. Silas's pristine silver SUV was parked in its usual spot, angled perfectly as if for a lifestyle magazine shoot. Through the bay window, the one Maya had drawn so carefully, I could see my mother, Diane, moving through the dining room. She was carrying a crystal water pitcher, her movements fluid and practiced. Everything was in its place. The orchids were blooming. The sun was hitting the brass door knocker just right. It was a masterpiece of domestic tranquility that depended entirely on our absence to remain balanced. I didn't knock. I used my old key. I heard the lock tumble, a sound that used to mean safety but now sounded like a breach. The house smelled of rosemary and slow-roasted beef. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a rhythmic, judgmental precision. As we stepped into the foyer, the laughter from the dining room died a sudden, jagged death. My mother appeared in the archway, the pitcher still in her hand. She didn't drop it. She was too well-bred for that. But her eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine irritation flickering across her face before the hostess mask snapped back into place. "Thea," she said, her voice a choreographed trill of surprise. "We didn't expect you. Silas said you had a big electrical contract this weekend and wouldn't be able to make it." I looked past her at the table. Silas was sitting there, his napkin already tucked into his collar, looking everywhere but at me. Beside him, Claire was busy cutting Sophie's meat into tiny, perfect squares. There were 5 settings. 5 crystal glasses. 5 gold-rimmed plates. Not a single extra chair in sight. "Silas was mistaken, Mom," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the high-ceilinged room. "We weren't busy. We've never been busy on Sundays. We just stopped being invited." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father, Gerald, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a tea towel. He looked at Maya, then at me, then at the floor. He was the silent partner in this architecture of exclusion, the man who let the walls be built because it was easier than arguing with the architect. "Well," he muttered, "now that you're here, I'll go get the folding chairs from the garage." "The folding chairs," Marcus repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Of course. Because heaven forbid we actually have a permanent seat at the table." Maya didn't move. She stood by the umbrella stand, clutching her stuffed rabbit, looking at the 5 people who had already started their lives without her. She looked at the table, then at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized she was right. She was the extra. The afterthought. The one who lived in the rain. The meal was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My mother rearranged the table with a tight, controlled efficiency that made every clink of a fork sound like an accusation. Maya was tucked into the corner, sitting on a rusted metal folding chair that creaked every time she breathed. Sophie, meanwhile, sat in her high-backed velvet chair at my mother's right hand, being fed stories of Grandma's special weekend like she was royalty. "So, Sophie," my mother cooed, completely ignoring Maya's presence 3 feet away. "Are you excited for your solo in the spring recital? I've already picked out the most beautiful lavender dress for you. It matches your room upstairs perfectly." Sophie beamed, launching into a detailed description of her practice schedule. My mother leaned in, hanging on every word, her face glowing with a warmth she had never once directed toward the little girl sitting in the folding chair. "Maya had a project at school this week, too," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut through the sugary atmosphere. "She did a drawing. Her teacher was so impressed she called me in for a special meeting." My mother didn't look up from Sophie's plate. "That's nice, dear. Kids and their scribbles. Anyway, Silas, tell us about the merger. Is it finally going through?" Silas started talking, his voice loud and confident, filling the room with talk of market shares and quarterly projections. It was the Prescott script. Success. Ambition. The curated excellence that justified our exclusion. If we weren't part of the success, we didn't belong in the circle. I looked at Maya. She was picking at a piece of roast beef, her head down. She wasn't even trying to join the conversation anymore. She had checked out. She was back in the rain, even though she was sitting in the dining room. After dinner, the lavender room ritual began. My mother took Sophie by the hand, whispering about a special surprise waiting for her in her bedroom upstairs. They climbed the stairs together, their laughter echoing down the hallway. "I'm going to use the bathroom," I said to the room at large. But I didn't go to the bathroom. I followed them upstairs. I stood in the doorway of the lavender room, the room that used to be mine. It was unrecognizable. It was a shrine to Sophie. Hand-painted murals of forest animals. A canopy bed draped in silk. A bookshelf overflowing with brand-new hardcovers. And there, on the dresser, was the wall of 14. 14 framed photos of Sophie. Sophie and Grandma at the zoo. Sophie and Grandma at the beach. Sophie and Grandma at Christmas. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just a bedroom, it was a manifesto. It was my mother saying, "This is the child I chose. This is the child who fits the design." I walked back down the hall toward the small guest room at the end. The one we were allowed to use on holidays. I opened the door. It was cold. It smelled of mothballs and neglected dust. There was an old, lumpy mattress and a single, faded quilt. There were no photos on the dresser. No toys in the corner. No nameplate on the door. I looked back toward the stairs and saw Maya standing in the hallway. She was looking at the gold-lettered nameplate on Sophie's door, Sophie's Secret Garden. Then she looked at the blank, white door of the guest room. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Does Grandma know my name?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just grabbed her hand and led her back down the stairs. We didn't stay for dessert. We didn't say goodbye. We walked out the front door, the rosemary scent of the house feeling like a suffocating shroud. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the bay window. My mother was standing there, holding Sophie, watching us leave with the same detached curiosity she'd used to watch a stray dog wander off her property. The perfect design was back in balance. We were gone. The clinical report from Dr. Nina Caldwell arrived on Tuesday morning. I opened it at the kitchen table, my hands shaking so hard I nearly tore the envelope. It was 12 pages of cold, hard, psychological data. Dr. Caldwell didn't use flowery language. She used words like relational devaluation, internalized inadequacy, and chronic exclusionary stress. She had analyzed the rain drawing alongside 3 other drawings she'd had Maya do in a private session. In one, Maya had drawn a giant, golden sun over a house, but she had placed herself under a single, tiny black cloud. In another, she had drawn a table full of food, but she had drawn her own plate as a transparent circle with nothing on it. Maya is not merely feeling left out, the report stated in bold black ink. She is manifesting a core belief that she is inherently unlovable within her primary kinship structure. The sustained pattern of differential treatment, specifically the lavender room versus the folding chair dynamic, is creating a profound rift in her developmental sense of security. If this dynamic is not addressed and dismantled, the long-term effects on her self-worth will be catastrophic. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, the clock ticking like a countdown. Catastrophic. That was the word. My parents weren't just being difficult. They were being destructive. I didn't call Silas. I didn't call my father. I went straight to the source. I called my mother. Diane, I said, my voice is cold and sharp as a scalpel. I'm sending you an email. It contains a clinical evaluation of your granddaughter's mental health. You are going to read it. And then you are going to meet me at Dr. Caldwell's office on Thursday at 4 p.m. Thea, really, my mother sighed, the sound of a silk scarf rustling in the background. Another one of your episodes? We had a lovely dinner on Sunday. I even gave Maya the big piece of cake. Read the report, Mom. Read the part where the doctor says your perfect design is giving a 6-year-old chronic stress. If you aren't in that office on Thursday, I am filing for a formal mediation through the family court. I will make your architecture of silence very, very loud. She hung up on me. But an hour later, the Blackwood Circle chat, which I hadn't been kicked out of yet, started pinging. Silas, Thea, what the hell did you send Mom? She's hysterical. She says you're accusing her of child abuse. Claire, this is way out of line, Thea. We've always been nothing but kind to Maya. You're the one making this weird. Father, Thea, let's just talk. No doctors. No lawyers. Let's just have another dinner. I didn't reply. I watched the bubbles dance as they all took turns gaslighting me, defending the design, and painting me as the difficult daughter one last time. But then, a single private message popped up. It was from Silas. I saw the report, Thea. Claire doesn't know I read it. I looked at the rain drawing you sent. I never realized Sophie had a nameplate and Maya didn't. I just thought Mom was being grandma. I held my breath. The first crack in the wall. If you want to know the truth, Silas, I typed back, come to the office on Thursday. See what else Maya has been drawing while you were eating roast beef. Thursday came. Marcus and I sat in the plush, neutral-toned waiting room of Dr. Caldwell's office. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and expensive silence. At 3:55 p.m., the door opened. My mother walked in first, her chin held high, her designer bag clutched like a shield. My father followed, looking like he wanted to vanish into the wallpaper. But it was the third person who made my heart stop. Silas was there. He wasn't wearing his golden child suit. He looked tired. He looked uncertain. We were ushered into a private circle of chairs. Dr. Caldwell sat with a leather-bound folder on her lap. She looked at my mother, then at Silas, then at me. We are here, Dr. Caldwell began, her voice calm and authoritative, because a 6-year-old girl is standing in the rain. And today, we are going to find out who turned on the sprinklers. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but Dr. Caldwell held up a hand. Before anyone says anything, I want to show you the result of Maya's final exercise. I asked her to draw her perfect world. The world where she felt the safest. She pulled a large sheet of paper from her folder and laid it on the coffee table in the center of the circle. My mother leaned forward, her eyes scanning the page. Silas gasped. My father let out a broken, shuddering breath. The drawing was of a house. But it wasn't the blue-roofed house. It was a tiny, lopsided cottage with a sun that took up half the sky. Inside the cottage were 3 people, Marcus, me, and Maya. They were holding hands. They were smiling. But it was what was outside the house that made the room go cold. On the far edge of the paper, Maya had drawn a massive, black-tinted limousine. Inside the car were 5 people. They were small, featureless, and their mouths were drawn as straight, flat lines. Above the car, Maya had written 4 words in jagged, black crayon. The people who forgot. My mother looked at the drawing, her face turning a strange, ashen gray. I don't understand. We never forgot her. We had a schedule. You didn't forget her, Diane, Dr. Caldwell said, her voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. You erased her. And Maya didn't just notice. She documented it. Silas reached out a trembling hand and touched the black limousine. Thea, the limousine. That's the car we took to the recital last month. The one you weren't invited to. Recital? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What recital? Silas looked at my mother, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. Mom, you told us Thea had a flu. You told us she asked us not to call because she didn't want Maya to get jealous of Sophie's solo. I felt the room tilt. The secret war wasn't just about silence. It was about active, calculated deception. My mother stood up, her bag slipping from her lap. It was for the best. Maya wasn't ready. It would have been too much for her. Sit down, Diane, my father said, his voice suddenly firm, carrying a weight I hadn't heard in 30 years. But as my mother turned to snap at him, the office door opened. Dr. Caldwell's assistant leaned in, looking flustered. Dr. Caldwell? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman in the lobby. She says she's Jenna's mother, Claire's mother. She says she has something that belongs to Thea. Something she found in the lavender room while she was babysitting Sophie this morning. The assistant held up a small, crumpled piece of paper. I recognized it instantly. It was the attendance ledger from the nursing home, the one my grandmother had kept. The one the family claimed had been lost in the house sale. My mother's face didn't just turn gray, it turned white. She lunged for the paper, but Silas was faster. He snatched it out of the assistant's hand and flattened it against the table. As he read the first few lines, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Mom. Silas whispered, looking up at her with eyes that saw a stranger. What did you do? The paper in Silas's hand wasn't just a document, it was a ghost. It was the blue spiral notebook, the one my grandmother Dorothy had clutched to her chest like a shield during those long, silent years at Pinehurst. My mother, Diane, didn't just look guilty, she looked hunted. She reached for the notebook, her manicured nails scraping the mahogany table, but Silas pulled it back, his eyes scanning the pages with a frantic, nauseated intensity. Silas, give that to me, my mother commanded, her voice regaining that sharp, parental edge that usually signaled the end of a conversation. It's private. It's the ramblings of a woman who wasn't herself in her final days. It's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant, Mom, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. It's a ledger. March 14th. March 21st. April 4th. Entry after entry. Shelby came. Brought coffee. No one else. Shelby visited. Brought a book. No one else. He looked up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. There isn't a single mention of us. Not for 3 years. Not once. I felt the room tilt. The architecture of silence wasn't just a passive choice, it was a calculated erasure that had started long before Maya drew her first stick figure in the rain. My mother had hidden the evidence of her own mother's loneliness because it was the only way to maintain the perfect design. If she acknowledged that Shelby, the difficult granddaughter, was the only one showing up, the facade of the Prescott family would have shattered. I called, my mother hissed, her eyes darting toward the therapist, then back to Silas. I sent cards. The nursing home must have lost them. They were incompetent, we all know that. That's why we sued them. No, Mom, Silas said, flipping to the very back of the notebook, where a single, folded envelope was tucked into the spiral binding. He pulled it out. It was a letter from the Pinehurst administration, dated 2 months before Grandma Dorothy's hip surgery. It was addressed to my mother. This is a formal notice. It says they were returning your donation because they don't accept checks intended to redirect a resident's visitor logs. You tried to pay them to write our names into the book, didn't you? You tried to buy a history of love that you never actually gave. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a 10-year-old lie finally suffocating. My father, Gerald, sat frozen, his hands trembling so hard he had to tuck them under his thighs. He knew. He had always known. He was the silent contractor who helped her build the walls. Dr. Caldwell leaned forward, her voice a calm, clinical scalpel. Diane, look at the drawing on the table. The black limousine. The people who forgot. Maya didn't just sense the exclusion in your house. She sensed the legacy of it. She is drawing the truth that you've been trying to bribe into silence for a decade. My mother didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply stood up, grabbed her designer bag, and walked toward the door. I did what I had to do to keep this family together, she said, her back to us. I protected the image of this family when Shelby was busy trying to destroy it with her rebellious choices. If you want to believe the scribbles of a child and the delusions of a dying woman, that is your choice. But don't expect me to sit here and be interrogated by my own children. The door clicked shut behind her. Silas dropped the notebook onto the table. It landed on top of Maya's rain drawing, a heavy, blue anchor on a sea of blue crayon streaks. For the first time in my life, the golden child looked at me and didn't see a smudge on the canvas. He saw the only person who had been telling the truth. The fallout of the office meeting was like a controlled demolition. The Blackwood Circle group chat didn't just go quiet, it vanished. Silas called me that evening, his voice sounding like he'd aged a decade in 4 hours. He told me that when he got home, he went into Sophie's lavender room. He looked at the 14 photos on the dresser. He looked at the hand-painted nameplate. And then he looked at the guest room at the end of the hall, the one Maya had stared at with such quiet longing. I took the nameplate down, Shelby, he told me, the sound of a heavy breath coming through the line. And I told Claire that we're moving. We can't live 3 blocks away from a woman who treats love like a curated museum exhibit. I saw the ledger. I saw what she did to Grandma. I won't let her do it to Sophie. I won't let Sophie grow up thinking that being the favorite is a prize she won by being a puppet. Where is Mom? I asked, sitting on my porch, watching Marcus play tag with Maya in the twilight. She's at the house. Dad is in the guest room. She told him if he takes your side, she's filing for divorce. She's in full damage control mode, Shelby. She's already calling her friends, telling them you've had a psychotic break and that you're using a therapist to extort money from the estate. I closed my eyes. The old script. The difficult daughter is crazy. The difficult daughter is greedy. It was a comfortable lie, one that had protected her reputation for years. But she forgot one thing, I wasn't 24 anymore. I was a mother with a drawing that proved her world was underwater. Let her talk, I said. The truth doesn't need a publicist, Silas. It just needs a witness. But the secret war wasn't over. A week later, I received a formal legal notice in the mail. My mother wasn't just talking, she was suing. She was filing for grandparental visitation rights, claiming that Marcus and I were unfit and emotionally manipulative, using our daughter as a weapon to isolate her from her family. She was trying to use the law to force the design back into place. I stood at the mailbox, the white envelope feeling like a blade in my hand. She wanted access to Maya. She wanted to take the little girl who drew herself in the rain and bring her back into the blue-roofed house, where she could correct the narrative. She wanted to win. I called Dr. Caldwell. She's filed for visitation. She wants to force Maya into that house. She's overplaying her hand, Shelby, Dr. Caldwell said, her voice tight with a rare flash of anger. But we have to be careful. In this state, grandparents have significant rights if they can prove a substantial relationship exists. She's going to use those 14 photos on the fridge. She's going to use the lavender room. She's going to use every curated moment of the last 6 years to prove she's a devoted grandmother. But those photos aren't of Maya, I argued. They're of Sophie. To a judge who doesn't know the context, they look like a family, Caldwell warned. We need more than just a drawing, Shelby. We need the one thing your mother thinks she's destroyed. We need the testimony of the residents of that house. I looked at the blue spiral notebook sitting on my kitchen counter. I looked at the returned letters I'd found in the bank vault. And then I realized there was one person we hadn't talked to. One person who had been in that house every Sunday, watching the perfect design from the inside, but whose voice had been silenced by a lifetime of yes, Diane. I picked up my keys and drove to my father's office. My father's office was a shrine to the man he used to be before he became a shadow in my mother's light. Trophies from his days as a structural engineer. Blueprints of bridges that hadn't collapsed. He looked up when I walked in, and for the first time, I saw the structural failure in his own eyes. Thea, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. She told me not to talk to you. She said if I saw you, it would be betrayal. Dad, I said, sitting across from him. Maya drew a limousine with the people who forgot inside. She drew herself in the rain. You were in that limousine. You were at that table every Sunday. You watched her sit in a folding chair while Sophie sat on a throne. Why didn't you ever pull out a second chair? He looked at his hands, large, capable hands that had built half the skyline of this city, but couldn't seem to lift a finger against his wife. It was easier, Thea. It's always been easier to let Diane have her way. She has a way of making you feel like the world will stop spinning if the design is off by a millimeter. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it wouldn't hurt you. I thought you'd understand. I understood perfectly, Dad. I understood that my father valued his own convenience over his daughter's belonging. But this isn't about me anymore. She's suing for visitation. She wants to take Maya. My father went still. Visitation? She told me she was just filing paperwork to protect our interests. She's going to lie under oath, Dad. She's going to say she was a devoted grandmother to Maya. She's going to use the photos of Sophie and pretend they represent a close-knit family. Unless someone tells the truth. Unless the man who was at that table for 6 years finally speaks up. I pulled out the blue spiral notebook, Grandma Dorothy's ledger, and laid it on his desk. You watched her do this to her own mother, didn't you? You watched her by the silence of the nursing home. You watched her hide the notebook. You were there, Dad. You were a witness to the first erasure. Are you going to be a witness to the second? He stared at the notebook, his breathing heavy and ragged. He reached out and touched the spiral binding, his fingers tracing the same paths Silas's had. She'll leave me, Thea. If I testify, she'll strip me of everything. The house, the reputation, she'll make sure I'm the difficult one next. Then you'll finally know what it feels like to be in the rain, Dad, I said, standing up. But at least you'll have an umbrella. It's called the truth. I walked out of his office, leaving the notebook on his desk. I didn't know if he would show up. I didn't know if the golden child's defection and the difficult daughter's drawing were enough to break a 30-year habit of silence. The court date was set for the following Tuesday. Marcus and I sat on one side of the mahogany-paneled room. My mother sat on the other, flanked by a team of lawyers who looked like they were carved out of ice. She didn't look at me. She looked like a queen defending her borders. The judge, a formidable woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen 1,000 family wars, looked down at the petition. Mrs. Prescott, you are claiming a substantial and loving relationship with the minor, Maya Afton. You have submitted 14 photographs as evidence of this bond. I have, Your Honor, my mother said, her voice a perfect, melodic blend of grief and resolve. My granddaughter is my world. We have a dedicated room for her in our home. We spend every Sunday together. My daughter's attempt to sever this bond is a result of her own personal vendetta against me. A vendetta that is unfortunately harming the child. The judge looked at the photos. Then she looked at the rain drawing, which Dr. Caldwell had submitted as an exhibit. And this drawing, Mrs. Prescott? The one where the child depicts herself outside your home in a storm? A creative exercise, Your Honor, my mother said, dismissively. My daughter has always been prone to dramatic interpretations. She likely coached the child to draw this to support her case. I see, the judge said. She looked toward the back of the courtroom. We have a witness on the list. Mr. Gerald Prescott. Mr. Prescott, please take the stand. My mother froze. She turned in her seat, her eyes widening as my father walked slowly toward the front of the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. And in his hand, he was clutching the blue spiral notebook. He took the oath, his voice shaking but audible. Mr. Prescott, the judge said. Your wife has testified to a substantial and loving relationship with Maya Afton. As the grandfather who was present at these Sunday dinners, can you confirm this? My father looked at my mother. She was staring at him, her eyes burning with a silent, terrifying command. Say yes. Maintain the design. My father looked down at the notebook. He opened it to the middle, to a page where my grandmother had written, waiting by the window. No one came. Your Honor, my father said, his voice suddenly clear, resonating through the hushed courtroom. I have spent 30 years being a silent partner in a lie. But my granddaughter drew a limousine full of people who forgot. And I think it's time I told you who else we forgot. He held up the notebook. This is not just about Maya. This is about a pattern of erasure that my wife has used to curate her life like a magazine. Those 14 photos she submitted? They aren't of Maya. Not a single one. The judge paused, her pen hovering over the paper. They aren't of the child in question? No, Your Honor, my father said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. They are all of our other granddaughter, Sophie. Because in my wife's house, there is only room for the people who fit the picture. And Maya. Maya was never in the frame. The gasp that went through the courtroom was like a physical wave. My mother stood up, her face a mask of pure, unbridled rage. Gerald. How dare you? After everything I've done for you. Sit down, Mrs. Prescott, the judge barked. But as the judge turned back to my father, my mother's lawyer leaned in and whispered something in her ear. My mother went still. Her rage didn't vanish, but it shifted into something colder. Something tactical. Your Honor, my mother's lawyer said, standing up. In light of Mr. Prescott's unexpected testimony, we would like to introduce a final piece of evidence. A recording from the secret room in the old Blackwood house. A recording that proves Shelby Afton didn't just visit her grandmother. She coerced her. I felt the blood drain from my face. The secret room. The recording. I looked at Marcus, who looked as confused as I was. My mother looked at me then. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her lips. The perfect design wasn't dead. It was just changing shape. Play it, the judge said. The air in the courtroom didn't just go cold, it felt like it had been sucked out of the room. My mother, Diane, sat there with a spine like a steel rod, her eyes fixed on the judge with a terrifying, serene confidence. She wasn't a cornered animal anymore. She was a hunter who had just revealed a hidden trap. Her lawyer, a man with a voice like dry parchment, stepped forward and placed a small, silver digital recorder on the evidence table. "Your Honor," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. "Before we discuss erasure or drawings, we must discuss the character of the woman claiming to protect the minor. We have a recording recovered from a voice-activated security device in the Blackwood estate. The secret room my client's daughter was so keen to explore. It captures a conversation between Shelby Afton and her grandmother, Dorothy, just days before the will was changed." I felt Marcus's hand tighten on mine, his knuckles like stones. My father, Gerald, was still standing near the witness box, his face a mask of confusion. He looked at the recorder as if it were a ticking bomb. I tried to remember. I had been in that house 1,000 times. I had sat with Grandma Dorothy in her final weeks, whispering about the past, about the design, about the escape plan we were building. But a recording? "Play it," the judge commanded. The scratchy hiss of background noise filled the room first, the sound of an old house breathing, the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock I'd drawn 100 times. Then, my voice. It sounded different, sharper, more urgent. "They don't care, Grandma. You know that, right? Donna, Silas, Mom. They're already picking out the furniture. They're talking about the future like you're already a ghost. If you don't sign the trust over to me, they'll liquidate everything. They'll put you in the cheapest room they can find and walk away." Then, Grandma Dorothy's voice thin, reedy, sounding exhausted. "I know, Shelby. I know. But the house, the legacy. The legacy is a lie, Grandma," my voice continued, sounding cold, almost predatory. "The only way to save it is to cut them out. All of them. You have to make me the sole executor. Do you understand? It's the only way you stay safe. Sign the papers, Grandma. Do it now." The recording cut off with the sharp sound of a pen scratching against paper. My mother didn't look at me. She simply adjusted her pearl necklace, a slow, triumphant smile touching the corners of her mouth. The courtroom erupted. The architecture of silence had been replaced by a wall of noise. My own words, stripped of their context, sounded exactly like the undue influence my mother had been accusing me of for years. I wasn't the protector. To anyone listening to that tape, I was the ultimate long game player. I was the one who had engineered the erasure. "Your Honor," my mother's lawyer said over the din, "this isn't a mother trying to exclude a daughter. This is a mother trying to protect a granddaughter from a woman who manipulated a dying elder for a 7-figure windfall. Shelby Afton didn't show up out of love. She showed up for the secret room." I looked at my father. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. The man who had finally found his voice was losing it again, drowning in a fresh wave of my mother's curated truth. The golden child was the first to break the silence. Silas stood up in the gallery, his face a mosaic of betrayal and confusion. He looked at me, then at the recorder, then at our mother. The defection I had worked so hard to secure was crumbling in real time. "Shelby," he whispered, the words sounding like a shard of glass. Did you know about the lockboxes before the lawsuit?" "Silas, it's not what it sounds like," I started, my voice sounding desperate even to my own ears. The context, Grandma was terrified. She knew Mom was trying to move her to a budget facility to save the estate money. I was trying to give her leverage. Leverage? My mother interjected, her voice a sharp, clear bell. You were leveraging a confused old woman into signing away her children's history. You used my granddaughter's drawings to paint us as monsters so no one would look at what you were doing in the dark. You talk about the people who forgot, Shelby. But you're the one who remembered exactly where the gold was hidden. The judge hammered her gavel, her face a mask of clinical detachment. Enough. Mr. Afton, Mrs. Afton, sit down. We are here to discuss the welfare of the minor, not the probate of the Blackwood estate. However, the credibility of the primary caregiver is now in question. This court will not grant visitation based on a crayon drawing if the parent providing the evidence is found to be acting with malicious intent. She turned to her clerk. I want a full psychological evaluation of Shelby Afton. I want the secret room recording forensically verified. And until then, I am issuing a temporary protective order. Maya Afton is to be placed in the temporary custody of her maternal grandparents, Gerald and Diane Prescott, effective immediately. The world tilted. I felt Marcus surge to his feet, his voice a roar of protest that was quickly drowned out by the bailiffs. Maya. They were taking Maya. They were taking the little girl who drew herself in the rain and putting her back into the house where the rain was manufactured. Mom, no. I screamed, reaching across the barrier as the bailiffs pulled me back. You can't do this. You'll destroy her. My mother stood up, her face a mask of calm, maternal concern. We'll take very good care of her, Shelby. She'll have the lavender room. She'll have the design. She'll finally be where she belongs, inside the frame. She walked past me, her perfume, the same rosemary and lavender scent of the blue-roofed house, filling my lungs like a poison. As she reached the door, she turned back and looked at the silver recorder. You should have stayed in the rain, Shelby, she whispered, so softly only I could hear. It's much harder to lie when you're standing in the light. I watched them lead Maya out a side door, my daughter, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes searching for me with a terrifying, silent panic. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the black limousine from her drawing. It had finally come to pick her up. The house felt like a tomb. For 3 days, Marcus and I lived in a state of catatonic shock, our voices replaced by the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. The silence I had fought so hard to break was now a physical weight, pressing down on us until every breath felt like an effort. Silas wouldn't take my calls. My father had disappeared back into the architecture of silence, his phone disconnected, his office locked. I was the difficult daughter again, but this time, the label was backed by a digital recording and a court order. She planned it, Marcus, I whispered, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where Maya's drawing used to hang. She didn't just find that recording. She engineered the secret room to have it. She knew I'd try to protect Grandma. She knew exactly what I'd say. It doesn't matter how she got it, Marcus said, his voice a low, jagged growl. What matters is what's happening in that house right now. Maya is in the lavender room. She's being corrected, Shelby. Your mother is rewriting her memory one Sunday dinner at a time. I looked at the blue spiral notebook, the only piece of evidence I still had. I flipped through the pages, searching for something, anything I had missed. Entry after entry, Shelby came. No one else. Shelby brought coffee. No one else. And then, I saw it. A single page near the very end, where the ink was smudged, as if Grandma Dorothy's hand had been shaking. It wasn't an entry. It was a list of numbers. 14, 14. 14. I frowned. 14? Like the 14 photos on the fridge? No. These were preceded by a word I hadn't noticed before. Cameras. My heart skipped a beat. Cameras 14. Code 0826. I looked at Marcus. Grandma didn't trust banks, but she didn't just hide things in the floorboards. She was a teacher, Marcus. She taught me that the best way to catch a cheater is to watch them when they think no one is looking. What are you saying? The recorder my mother used, she said it was from a voice-activated security device in the secret room. But Grandma's notebook says there were 14 cameras. 14, Marcus. Not just in the secret room. Everywhere. I stood up, my mind racing. The Blackwood estate had been sold as is. My mother had never stepped foot inside to help pack. She had sent a clean-out crew. But if Grandma Dorothy had installed a high-end security system, one that recorded more than just audio, there was a chance the entire history of the architecture of silence was sitting on a hard drive somewhere in that house. The new owners, I said, grabbing my keys. The ones I bought the salvage rights from. They said the attic was full of old tech they hadn't touched yet. Shelby, it's a long shot, Marcus warned. It's the only shot we have. My mother used a snippet of audio to frame me. I'm going to find the video that shows what really happened in that room. And I'm going to find the video that shows what she did to Grandma the night of the fall. We drove to the old house, the tires screaming on the pavement. But as we pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. There was a black SUV parked out front. A familiar SUV. Silas was standing on the porch, holding a sledgehammer. He looked at us, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. I went to see Maya today, he said, his voice trembling. Mom wouldn't let me in. She said she was resting. But I saw her through the window, Shelby. She was sitting in that lavender room, staring at the wall. She wouldn't even look at me. He stepped toward us, the sledgehammer dragging on the wood. I don't care about the gold anymore, he whispered. And I don't care about the recording. I want to know why there's a locked door in the basement that Mom tried to pay the clean-out crew $5,000 to encase in concrete without opening. He looked at the basement window, where a faint, blue light was flickering in the dark. I think the secret room wasn't just for Grandma's gold, Silas said. I think it was for the one thing Mom couldn't curate. He swung the sledgehammer. The sound of breaking wood echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Let's go see what's behind the perfect design, Silas said. As the door gave way, a smell hit us, not of dust or mothballs, but of something clinical, something cold. And as we stepped into the dark, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She's not in the lavender room, Shelby. Check the limousine. The basement of the Blackwood estate didn't smell like a cellar. It smelled like a server room, ozone, chilled air, and the hum of high-voltage cooling fans. As Silas's sledgehammer cracked through the false drywall, we didn't find a hoard of gold or a stack of savings bonds. We found a wall of monitors. 14 of them, glowing with a ghostly, flickering blue light that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. She didn't just buy the nursing home's silence, I whispered, stepping into the cramped, windowless space. She brought the nursing home here. Silas dropped the hammer. It hit the concrete with a dull thud that echoed up into the empty house. He pointed at the center screen. It wasn't a recording from 3 years ago. It was a live feed. I felt my heart stop. The camera was angled from a high corner, looking down into a room that was stark, white, and windowless. It wasn't the lavender room. It wasn't the perfect design my mother had boasted about in court. It was a padded observation suite, hidden behind the reinforced walls of the Blackwood basement. And there, sitting on a small cot in the center of the room, was Maya. She wasn't crying. She wasn't playing. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a camera lens she couldn't see. My mother, Diane, was standing just outside the heavy steel door, visible on a second monitor. She was holding a clipboard, her face set in a mask of clinical, terrifying detachment. She's correcting her, Silas breathed, his voice trembling with a feral kind of rage. She's not just taking custody, Shelby. She's trying to erase the rain drawing by force. She's treating our niece like a lab rat until she learns to draw the 5 people inside the house again. I lunged for the keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys. The code Grandma Dorothy had left in the notebook 0826 wasn't just for a lockbox. It was the override for the entire Blackwood security network. As the system chirped and accepted the input, the secret war didn't just end, it inverted. Suddenly, the monitors didn't just show the basement. They began to play back the history of the house. The night of Grandma Dorothy's fall. The night that Architecture of Silence was signed into existence. And there, in high-definition video, was the truth my mother thought she'd encased in concrete. We watched the screen as a younger Diane stood over Grandma Dorothy, who was lying on the floor, clutching her fractured hip. My mother wasn't calling 911. She was leaning down, whispering into her mother's ear, holding a pen and a document. "Sign the house over, Mom. Sign it over, and I'll call the ambulance. If you don't, Shelby will find you in the morning, and will tell the police she was the one who pushed you." I felt the bile rise in my throat. The secret room recording hadn't been a confession of my greed, it had been a desperate attempt to save a woman who was already being held hostage by her own daughter. My mother hadn't just curated a family, she had built a prison and called it a legacy. "Call the police, Silas," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the basement floor. "And tell them to bring an umbrella. Because the storm is finally coming inside." The sirens didn't sound like a rescue, they sounded like an ending. When the police breached the back entrance of the Blackwood estate, my mother didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply smoothed her skirt, adjusted her pearl necklace, and looked at the lead officer with a look of profound, patronizing disappointment. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice a perfect, melodic trill. "My daughter has always been prone to these dramatic interventions. I was simply protecting my granddaughter from an unstable environment." But then, Silas stepped out of the basement shadows. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was the witness. He held up the tablet, the video of the ambulance bribe playing on a loop for every officer in the room to see. My mother's face didn't just break, it vanished. The hostess mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing the hollow, hungry thing that had been running our lives for 30 years. She looked at the screen, then at Silas, then at me. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a script. She didn't have a design. She was just a woman standing in a house full of secrets that were no longer secret. "You ruined it," she hissed at me, her voice a jagged, broken glass. "I gave you a name. I gave you a place in the world. And you threw it away for a man with sawdust in his hair and a daughter who couldn't even stay inside the lines." "I didn't ruin it, Mom," I said, as the officers moved in to place the cuffs on her wrists. "I just stopped pretending the walls were there." Maya didn't draw herself in the rain because of me. She drew it because she could see through the roof. They let her out through the front door, the same door Maya had drawn in her first portrait. As the black and white cruiser pulled away, the blue roof of the house seemed to lose its luster, fading into the gray of the approaching twilight. I ran to the basement. I didn't wait for a key. I used the override code one last time. The heavy steel door hissed open, and the clinical, cold air of the observation suite rushed out to meet me. Maya didn't move at first. She stayed on the cot, her small shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Maya," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's Mommy. We're going home." She looked up. Her eyes were wide, searchingly, as if she were checking to see if I was another projection, another part of the correction. Then, she saw Marcus standing behind me. She saw the rain drawing clutched in my hand. She didn't run. She walked, slowly, tentatively, until she reached the threshold of the room. She reached out a trembling hand and touched my face. "Is it still raining, Mommy?" "No, baby," I said, pulling her into my arms, the smell of strawberry shampoo and real, living warmth finally replacing the ozone of the basement. The sun is out. And we're never going back into that house again. It's been 6 months since the architecture of silence collapsed. The Blackwood estate was sold again, this time, for real. The proceeds didn't go to Silas or my mother. They went into a trust for Maya, overseen by a board of directors that includes Dr. Nina Caldwell and my father, who is finally learning how to live in a house without a designer. My mother is in a state-mandated psychiatric facility, awaiting trial for kidnapping and elder abuse. She still sends letters. I don't open them. Silas says she's currently trying to redesign the common room of the ward, telling the other patients that she's the one in charge of the perfect frame. Some people never learn how to be in the rain. Silas and Claire moved 3 states away. They live in a lopsided farmhouse with a porch that needs painting and a yard full of weeds. Sophie doesn't have a lavender room anymore. She has a room with posters of space nebulas and a messy desk covered in half-finished science projects. Silas calls me every Sunday. We don't talk about market shares or mergers. We talk about the weather. We talk about the truth. Marcus and I bought a small cottage near the coast. It's not a fortress. It has a roof that leaks when the wind hits it just right, and the welcome mat is permanently crooked. But the door is never locked. Last Tuesday, Maya brought home a new drawing from school. I sat at the kitchen table, my heart hammering in my chest as I unfolded the paper. I looked for the blue streaks. I looked for the black limousine. I looked for the girl standing alone in the grass. But the page was different. She had drawn a house, but it didn't have a roof. It was just a floor and 4 walls, and the sun was shining down into every corner. There were 10 people inside. Marcus and me. Silas, Claire, and Sophie. My father, looking older but smiling. Mrs. Vance and Dr. Caldwell. And in the very center, holding a giant, yellow umbrella that she was sharing with everyone else, was Maya. She hadn't drawn herself inside a house to be safe. She had drawn a world where the house didn't need to be a prison. "What's this one called, Maya?" I asked, pulling her into my lap. She looked at the drawing, then at me, her eyes bright and clear, no longer braced for the storm. "It's called the open house," she said. "Because everyone can see the sun, Mommy. Even the people who forgot." I tucked the drawing into the front of our refrigerator, right next to the one of the little girl in the rain. I realized then that the long game wasn't about winning a war or securing a legacy. It was about the moment the crayons stopped being weapons and started being a bridge. The rain had finally stopped. And for the first time in 34 years, I realized I wasn't the difficult daughter. I was just the one who finally found the way home.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.